You'll be swell. You'll be great. You'll have the whole world on a plate. Starting here, starting now. Honey, everything's coming up roses. Hey everyone. Ooh, I forgot to turn on the light for the cats. No, well, they haven't been showing up on the camera anyway. How is everyone doing? Welcome in, Taka. Congrats on getting first. How you doing this evening? Anyway. Just got an SSR drop from... Really? Cool. Everyone is playing the horse game. So an SSR drop. Sounds pretty good. Free is even better. Doing pretty good. I got 2 more stories written for book 3 today. I think I only have 1 left. And then I can get ready to submit it. So, that's coming up. Let me see how many I have, because I think I've only got 1 story left. Okay, the last of the scheduled stories is the one I'm working on now. Yeah. So I'll only be a week or 2 behind my previous releases. I did get the first 2 revised again. And with my revision, ended up being fewer pages, so I could drop the price on it. So, yeah. This one... How many pages am I on this one? I'll probably be at 160 pages, I think. Probably 162, 163. So they might be the same length as my second one. And my first one's 156 pages. My second one was 185. So this one may not be as long as the second one. Of course, I had fun writing Puss in Boots, especially since I narrate it to myself when I'm typing, and I cannot do Puss in Boots without giving a Spanish accent. Thank you so much, Shrek. I think even when I narrated it on stream, I started trying to pull off an Antonio Banderas accent. Ah, you're stuck on my head. But yeah, writing is almost done, and the tedious approval time. Hopefully everything will be done at least by August. Because then I have something else I'm doing in August. Because I'm going to try to make sure I do a gaming stream on the 11th or 10th or 11th, one of those days. I think the 10th. Again, I'd have to check my notes. But I did find it's more of a story than an actual game. But I'm going to do In the Fabled Woods, so that'll be creepy as hell. But apparently it's done along the same lines as Firewatch and a few other games, so it'll be interesting. And seeing as I haven't done any horror games ever, it'll be, yeah, it'll be interesting to react to at least. Let me skip over to the study. There we are. Yeah, I think they said that if you play it straight through, it may not be longer than 90 minutes. I did test it some today just to see how well my computer would handle it, and it definitely looks interesting. Of course, I usually play everything windowed at the 1600 by 900 because that's what I stream at. And I had to make sure positioning and everything was good on there, so everything should be set up for my, technically my anniversary stream. Anniversary of streaming, not anniversary of really anything else. But yeah, I will have been streaming for 4 years. And that in itself is crazy. Considering I first started streaming from my Xbox, because that was the only way I had to stream, and then I found out how to remote stream through my laptop, and now I can't do that because I can't afford the subscription fee. But anyway, tonight we're getting more Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. I don't really know if it's impressive. I certainly don't feel impressive. I mean, it's strange if you think about the fact that I've been streaming for about 4 years. Went from a game PNG, which was just my normal talking head. Then I animated my book cover, so it worked as a PNG, so I animated the mouth so it would move when I was talking and made that into a PNG. Then I got this model. And then I got the model from Dusk. And yeah, been back and forth about a lot of things. I'm supposed to be getting another model from the Moxie's Corner people that I won last year. As far as I know, it is being rigged. But I haven't had an update on that for a month, so eventually things might change. Until then, I'll keep using this one for at least storytelling. But anyway, it is almost 10 past the hour, so I should probably crack the book open. And I don't know if you were here. Oh, okay, it's another collection on it. His memoirs from the Confidential Clerk. Are they all in this series? Good. Ah, good, there. So it is a series. But I don't know if you were here for Rivals of Sherlock Holmes, the first book, but there was one in there that she actually goes by the name, the Baroness Orczy. Well, I've read 7 stories from her in the first book. This one, I think, has... look, 5 more. Or 6 more, I guess. No, just 5 more, because it's got the main title, then it's got the story title. So, anyway, Feel free to lurk, settle back, get comfortable. If you do have to leave, please feel free to leave my window open because anything helps. But the first story for tonight, Skin of My Tooth, his memoirs by his confidential clerk, compiled and edited by the Baroness Orczy. Story 1. The Murder in the Saltashe Woods. We called him Skin of My Tooth. His friends, who were few, his clients, who were many, and I, his confidential clerk, Saltashe, and very proud I am to hold that position. I believe, as a matter of fact, that his enemies, and their name is Legion, call him Patrick Mulligan. But to us who know him, he is Skin of My Tooth. He always was, from the day that he got a verdict of not guilty out of the jury who tried James Tovey, the Dartmouth murderer. Tovey hadn't many teeth, but it was by the skin of those few molars of his that he escaped the gallows. Not thanks to the pleading of his counsel, but all thanks to the evidence collected by Patrick Mulligan, his lawyer. Of course, Skin of My Tooth is not popular amongst his colleagues. There is much prejudice and petty spite in all professions, and the law is not exempt from this general rule. Everyone knows that Skin of My Tooth is totally unacquainted with the use of kid gloves. His works for the best of his client, and let the other side look for themselves, I say. Funny-looking man, too, old Skin of My Tooth. Fat and rosy and comfortable as an Irish pig, with a face as stodgy as a boiled currant dumpling. His hair, I believe, would be red if it gave it any chance at all, but he wears it cropped so close to his bulky head that he looks bald in some lights. Then we all know that gentle smile of his and that trick of casting down his eyes which gives him a look that the best described by the word coy. That trick is always a danger signal to the other side. Now, in the case of Edward Kelly, everyone will admit that the young man came nearer being hanged for murder than any of us would care for. But this is how it all happened. On Tuesday, September 3rd, Mary Mills and John Craddock, who were walking through the Saltashe woods, came across a body of a man lying near the pond in a pool of blood. Mary, of course, screamed, and would have fled, but John, manfully conquering the feeling of sickness which threatened to overcome him too, went to the body to get a closer view of the face. To his horror, he recognized Mr. Jeremiah Wadcote, a well-known, respectable resident of Pashet. The unfortunate man seemed to John Craddock to be quite dead. Still, he thought it best to dispatch Mary at once for Dr. Howden, and also to the police station, whilst he, with really commendable courage, elected to remain beside the body alone. It appears that about half an hour after Mary had left him, John thought that he detected a slight movement in the rigid body, which he had propped up against his knee, and that the wounded man uttered a scarcely audible sigh, and then murmured a few words. The young man bent forward eagerly, striving with all his might to catch what those words might be. According to his subsequent evidence before the coroner's jury, Mr. Wadcote then opened his eyes and murmured quite distinctly, "The letter, Kelly, Edward, the other." After that, he seemed all over, for the face became more rigid and more ashen in color than before. It was past 6 o'clock before the doctor and the inspector, with 2 constables and a stretcher from Pashet's police station, appeared upon the scene and relieved John Craddock of his lonely watch. Mr. Wadcote had not spoken again, and the doctor pronounced life to be extinct. "Hey, Matsu," The body was quietly removed to Mr. Wadcote's house in Pashet, Mary Mills having already volunteered for the painful task of breaking the news to Miss Amelia, Mr. Wadcote's sister, who lived with him. That's well. The unfortunate man was cashier to Messrs. Kelly & Co., the great wine merchants, so Mr. Kelly of Saltashe Park, also Mr. Edward Kelly of Wood Cottage, were apprised of this sad event. At this stage the tragic affair seemed wrapped up in the most profound mystery. Mr. Jeremiah Wadcote was not known to possess a single enemy, and he certainly was not sufficiently endowed with worldly wealth to tempt a highway robber. So far, the police had found nothing on the scene of the crime which could lead to a clue. Footsteps of every shape and size leading in every direction, a few empty cartridges here and there, all of which meant nothing since Saltashe woods are full of game, and both Mr. Kelly and Mr. Edward Kelly had had shooting parties within the last few days. The public understood that permission had been obtained from Mr. Kelly to drag the pond, and not knowing what to think or to fear, it awaited the day of the inquest with eager excitement. I believe that the inquest was one of the most memorable in the annals of the coroner's court. There was a large crowd, of course, for the little town of Pashet was a mass of seething curiosity. The expert evidence of Dr. Howden, assisted in the divisional surgeon, was certainly very curious. Both learned gentlemen gave it their opinion that the deceased met his death through the discharge of a small shot fired from a rifle at a distance of not more than a couple of yards. All the shot had lodged close together in the heart, and the flesh round the wound was slightly charred. The police, on the other hand, had quite a tidbit of sensation ready for the eager public. They had dragged the pond and had found the carcass of a dog. The beast had evidently been shot with the same rifle that had ended poor Mr. Wadcote's days, and the divisional surgeon, who had examined the carcass, having pronounced the wound, which was in its side, to be exactly similar in character. A final blow dealt on the animal's head with the butt end of a rifle, however, had been the ultimate cause of its death. As a medical officer gave his sensational bit of evidence, a sudden and dead silence fell over all the crowded court, for it had leaked out earlier in the day that the dead dog found in the pond was Rags, Mr. Edward Kelly's well-known black retriever. In the midst of the silence, Miss Amelia Wadcote, the sister of the deceased gentleman, stepped forward, dressed in deep black and holding a letter, which she handed to the coroner. "It came under cover, addressed to me," she explained, "on Tuesday evening." The coroner, half in hesitation, turned the square envelope between his fingers. At last he read aloud. "To the coroner and jury at the inquest, should a fatal accident occur to me this Tuesday afternoon in Saltashe Woods." Then he tore up the envelope, and immediately everyone noticed the look of boundless astonishment which spread over his face. There was a moment of breathless silence, expectation among the crowd, while Miss Amelia stood quietly with her hands demurely folded over her gingham umbrella, and her swollen eyes fixed anxiously upon the letter. At last the coroner, turning to the jury, said, "Gentlemen, this letter is addressed to you as well as to myself. I am, therefore, bound to acquaint you with its contents, but I must, of course, warn you not to allow your minds to be unduly influenced, however strange these few words may seem to you. The letter is dated from Ivy Lodge, Pashet, Tuesday, September 3rd, and signed Jeremiah Wadcote. It says, 'Mr. Coroner and gentlemen of the jury, I beg to inform you that on this day at 2:30 p.m. I am starting to walk in Saltashe, there to meet Mr. Cohet and Mr. Kelly on important business. Mr. Edward Kelly has desired me to meet him by the pond at Saltashe Woods on my way. He knows of the business which takes me to Saltashe. He and I had a violent quarrel in the office on the subject last night, and he has every reason for wishing that I should never speak of it to Mr. Kelly or to Mr. Cohat. Last night he threatened to knock me down. If any serious accident happened to me, let Mr. Edward Kelly account for his actions." A deadly silence followed, and then a muttered curse from somewhere among the crowd. "This is damnable!" And Mr. Edward Kelly, young, good-looking, but at this moment as pale as a death, pushed his way forward among the spectators. He wanted to speak, but the coroner waved him aside in the most official manner, while Miss Amelia Wadcote demurely concluded her evidence. Personally, she knew nothing of her brother's quarrel with Mr. Edward Kelly. She did not even know that he was going to Saltashe Woods on the fatal afternoon. Then she retired, and Mr. Edward Kelly was called. Questioned by the coroner, he admitted the quarrel spoken of by the deceased, admitting meeting him by the pond at Saltashe Woods, but emphatically denying having the slightest ill feeling against old Wadcote, as he called him, and above all, having the faintest desire of wishing to silence him forever. "The whole thing is a ghastly mistake, a weird joke," he declared firmly. "But the quarrel," persisted the coroner. "I won't deny it," reported the young man. "It was a result of a preposterous accusation old Wadcote saw fit to level against me." "But why should you meet him clandestinely in the woods?" "It was not a clandestine meeting. I knew that he intended walking past Saltashe from Pashat to the woods. The road from my house cuts in the direction which he would be bound to follow, exactly at right angles. I wished to speak to him, and it saved me a journey all the way to Pashat, or him one down to my house. I met him at 3:30. We had about 15 minutes' talk, and then I left him and went back to my home." "What was he doing when you left him?" asked the coroner, with distinct sarcasm. "He had sat down on a tree stump and was smoking his pipe." "You had your gun with you, of course, on this expedition through the woods?" "I seldom go out without my gun this time of year." "Quite so," assented the coroner grimly. "But what about your dog, who was found with its head battered in, very close to the spot where lay the body of the deceased?" "Poor old Rags strayed away that morning. I did not see him all that day. He certainly was not with me when I went to meet old Wadcote." The rapidly spoken questions and answers had been listened to by the jury and the public with breathless interest. No one uttered a sound, but all were watching the handsome young man who seemed, with every word he uttered, to incriminate himself more and more. The quarrel, the assassination, the gun which was carrying, he denied nothing, but he did protest his innocence with all his might. One or two people had heard the report of a gun whilst walking on one or another of the roads that skirt Saltashe Woods, but the evidence as to the precise hour was unfortunately rather vague. Reports of guns in Saltashe Woods were very frequent, and no one had taken particular notice. On the other hand, the only witness who had seen Mr. Edward Kelly entering the wood was not ready to swear whether he had his dog with him or not. Although it had been fully expected, ever since Jeremiah Wadcote's posthumous epistle had been read, the verdict of willful murder against Edward St. John Kelly found the whole population of Pashat positively aghast. The brother of Mr. Kelly, of Saltashe Park, the accused was one of the most popular figures in this part of Hertfordshire. When his subsequent arrest became generally known in London, as well as in his own county, horror, amazement, and incredulity were quite universal. Part 2. The day after that memorable inquest and sensational arrest, namely on the Saturday, I arrived at her old dingy office in Finsbury Square about 12 o'clock, after I had seen some business in Somerset House for my esteemed employer. I found Skin of My Teeth curled up in his armchair before a small fire, as the day was wet and cold, just like a great fat and frowsy dog. He waited until I had given him a full report of what I had been doing, and then he said to me, I've just had a visit from Mr. Kelly of Saltashe Park. I was not astonished. That case of murder in the Saltashe woods was just one of those which inevitably drifted into the hands of Skin-O-My-Tooth. Though the whole aspect of it was remarkably clear, instinctively one scented a mystery somewhere. I suppose, sir, that it was Mr. Edward Kelly's behalf. Your penetration, Muggins, my boy, surpasses human understanding. My name is Alexander Stanislaus Mullins, but Skin-O-My-Tooth will have his little jokes. You are willing to undertake the case, sir? I'm going to get Edward Kelly out of the hole his own stupidity has placed him in. It will be by the skin of his teeth if you do, sir. The evidence against him is positively crushing, I muttered. Miss is as good as a mile, where the hangman's rope is concerned, Muggins. But you had better call on Handsome. We can go to the Pashet this afternoon. Edward Kelly is out on bail, and Mr. Kelly tells me that I shall find him at the wood cottage. I must get out of him the history of his quarrel with the murdered man. Mr. Kelly did not know it? Well, anyway, he seemed to think the best. The accused should tell me his own version of it. In any case, Mr. Kelly and his wife are devoured with anxiety about his brother, who seems to have been a bit of a scapegrace all his life. There was no time to say more, then, that we found out by hurrying we could catch the 1:50 p.m. train to Pashet. We found Mr. Edward Kelly at Wood Cottage, a pretty little house in the outskirts of Saltashe Woods. He had been told by a likely visit by his brother. He certainly looked terribly ill, and like a man overweighted by fate and circumstances. I'm a victim of most damnable circumstances, Mr. Mulligan, he said, but I swear, I am incapable of such a horrible deed. I always take for granted, Mr. Kelly, said Skin-O-My-Tooth blandly, that my client is innocent. If the reverse is the case, I prefer not to know it. But you might have to appear before magistrate on Monday. I must get a certain amount of evidence on your behalf in order to obtain what I remain to want. So will you try to tell me, as concisely and clearly as possible, what passed between you and Mr. Woodcote the day before the murder? I understand that there was a quarrel. Woodcote saw fit to accuse me of certain defalcations in the firm's banking account, which I was totally innocent, began Mr. Edward Kelly quietly. As you know, my brother and I are agents from England for M. de Courte's champagne. Woodcote was our cashier and bookkeeper. Twice a year we pay over to M. de Courte's bank in Paris the money derived from our sales of his wine, after deducting our commission. In the meanwhile, we have, jointly, the full control of the money. That is to say, all checks paid to the firm have to be endorsed by both of us, and all checks drawn on the firm must bear both our signatures. It was just a month before a half-year settlement of accounts. Woodcote, it appears, went down to the bank and got the passbook and cancelled checks, and discovered that some £10,000 whole the credit line due next month to M. de Courtet had been drawn out of the bank, the amounts having been debited from the books. To my intense amazement, he showed me the checks, and then and there accused me of having forged my brother's name and appropriated the firm's money to my own use. You see, he knew of certain unavowed advantages of mine which had often landed me in financial difficulties more or less serious, which are the real cause of my being forced to live in Wood Cottage, whilst my brother can keep up a fine establishment in Saltashe Park. The accusation was preposterous, and I was furious with him. I looked at the checks. My signature certainly was perfectly imitated, but my brother's perhaps a little less so. There were bearer checks made out to the replica of old Woodcote's handwriting to E. de Courtet, and endorsed on the back in a small, pointed foreign hand. Old Woodcote persisted in his accusations, and very high words ensued between us. I believe I had threatened to knock him down if he did not shut up. Anyway, he told me that he would go over to the next afternoon to Saltashe Park to expose me before my brother and to M. de Courtet, who was staying there on a visit to England for the shooting. I left him then, meaning to go myself to the same evening to Saltashe Park to see my brother about it. But on my journey home, certain curious suspicions with regard to old Wadcote himself crept up into my mind, and then and there I determined to try to see him again and talk the matter over more dispassionately with him, and what I thought would be his own interests. My intention was to make, of course, my brother acquainted with the whole matter at once, but to leave M. de Cohet out of the question at the present. So I wired to Wadcote in the morning to make an assignation, which was proved a most terrible mistake. Edward Kelly added that he left Jeremiah Wadcote after his interview with him at the pond, and in an excited frame of mind as before. Fearing that his own handwriting on the checks might entail serious consequences to himself, nothing would do but M. de Cohet as well as Mr. Kelly must be told the whole thing immediately. When I left him, concluded the young man, he was sitting on a tree stump by the pond, smoking his pipe, and I walked away to Wood Cottage. Do you know what became of the chicks? Asked Skin of my Tooth. Oh, Wadcote had them in his pocket when I left him. I conclude there has been no mention of them by the police, that they have not been found. There was so much simplicity and straightforwardness in Edward Kelly's narrative that I, for one, was ready to believe every word of it. But Skin of my Tooth's face was inscrutable. He sat in a low chair with his hands folded before him, his eyes shut, and a general air of polite imbecility about the whole unwieldy person. I could see that our client was viewing him with a certain amount of irritability. "Well, Mr. Milligan," he said at last, with nervous impatience. "Well, sir," replied Skin of my Tooth, "it strikes me that with your quarrel with the deceased, the signation of Woods, the posthumous denunciation of you as his assassin, and his dying words, we have about as complete case as we could wish." "Sir, in all cases of this sort, my dear sir," continued Skin of my Tooth quietly, "the great thing is to keep absolutely cool. If you are innocent, remember, I do not doubt it for a moment, then I will bring that crime home to its perpetrator. Justice never miscarries, at least when I have the guidance of it in my hands." It would be impossible to render the tone of supreme conceit which Skin of my Tooth made his last assertion, but it had the desired effect, for Edward Kelly brightened up visibly as he said, "I have implicit faith in you, Mr. Milligan. When shall we see you again?" "On Monday, before the magistrates. I can get that remand for you, I think, and then we shall know freehand. Now, we had better get along. I want to have a quiet think of the affair." Part 3. On Monday, Edward Kelly was formally charged before the Beak, and I must say that when I heard the formidable array of circumstantial evidence which the police had collected against our client, I sadly began to fear that not even by the skin of his teeth would Edward Kelly escape the awful hole in which he was literally wallowing. However, Skin of my Tooth hammered away at the police evidence with regard to the dog. The prosecution made a great point of the fact that Master Wadcote and Rags had been killed with the same rifle and at the same time and place, and that one point in Edward Kelly's favor was that neither his servants at Wood Cottage nor the witness who saw him enter the wood could swear that the dog was with him on that day. On the strength of that, and for the purpose of collecting further evidence with regard to the dog, Skin of my Tooth finally succeeded in obtaining a remand until the following Friday. Personally, I thought that there was quite sufficient evidence for hanging any man without the testimony of a dead dog, but I am quite aware that my opinion counts for very little. "Now, Muggins," said Skin of my Tooth to me later in the day, "the fun is about to begin. You go down to Coates this afternoon and find out all about those checks which caused the quarrel, and by whom they were presented. Don't mix the police up in the affairs, whatever you do. If there is anything you can't manage, get Fairburn to help you. He has discretion itself and hates the regular force. Beyond that, try and work alone." I had done more difficult jobs than that before, and now Skin in My Tooth knows he can rely on me. I left him curled up in an armchair with a French novel in his hand and started on my quest. I got to Coutts just before closing time, saw the chief cashier and explained my errand and its importance to him, asking for his kind of help in the matter. He was courteous in the extreme, and within a few moments I had ascertained from him the checks on Kelly & Co.'s account, perfect in regale, and made out to E. de Counter, or bearer, had been cashed on certain dates which he gave me. They were in each instance presented by a commissionaire in uniform who brought the card M. Edouard de Courtier, with "Please give bearer amount in £5 notes," scribbled in pencil in the same handwriting as the endorsement on the checks. The amounts varied from £1,200 to £3,000, continued the cashier, still referring by his book. Being bearer checks and signed in the usual manner, we had no occasion to doubt them, and of course we cashed them. The first check was drawn July 3rd, and the last was drawn August 29th. The cashier added one more detail which fairly staggered me, namely that the commissioner wore a cap with Kelly & Co. embroidered on it. If necessary, there were plenty of cashiers and clerks in the bank who could identify him. He was a tall man of marked foreign appearance, with heavy black hair, a beard, a mustache cut very trim. On one occasion when he left, he dropped a bit of paper containing Van Voort, Turf Commission Agent, Flushing, Holland. I thanked the cashier, and I took my leave. When I got back to the office, I found Skin on My Tooth placidly sleeping in his big armchair. I had had a hard day and was dead tired. For the moment when I saw him there, looking so fat, so pink, and so comfortable, well, I have a great respect for him. But I really felt quite angry. However, I told him what I had done. "Capital, capital, Muggins!" he ejaculated angrily. "But by Jove, that's a clever rascal. That touch about the name on the cap is particularly happy and daring. It completely allayed the suspicions of the cashiers at Coutts. Now listen, Muggins," he added, with that sudden, quick-changing mood in which, in him, a moment transformed him from the lazy, apathetic Irish lawyer to the weird human bloodhound who scents the track. "That foreign commissionaire is a disguise, of course. The chap hides the edge of the wig and shades the brow. The black beard and mustache conceal the mouth and chin. The foreign accent disguises the voice. We may take it, therefore, that the thief and his ambassador are one and the same person. A man, moreover, well known in Coutts, since the disguise was necessary. Do you follow me, Muggins? And remember that the motive is here. The man who defrauded Kelly & Co. is the same man who murdered Wardcote later on. Wardcote was effectually silenced, and the telltale checks were evidently been destroyed. There would have been silence and mystery over the whole scandal until the defalcations could be made good, but for Wardcote's letter to the coroner and his dying words. The letter. Kelly. Edward. The other? He paused suddenly, and remembered, seemed lost in thought. Then he muttered, "It's that confounded dog I can't make out. Did Edward Kelly, after all? It was the great after all which had me puzzled all along. Was Edward Kelly guilty after all? I'd asked myself hundreds of times a day. Then I was silent, lost in conjectures of this extraordinary and seemingly impenetrable mystery. He suddenly jumped up and shouted, "By Jove, I've got it, Muggins! The other! What a fool I've been! Go to bed, my boy. I want to rest too. Tomorrow we will be time enough to think about the other." Part 4. From that moment, Skin on My Tooth was a transformed being. He always is when he has got the case well in hand, as he calls it. He certainly possesses a weird faculty for following up the trail of blood. Once he holds what he believes to be a clue, his whole appearance changes. His great fat body seems, as it were, to crouch together, ready for a spring, and there's a weird quiver about his nostrils which probably suggests a bloodhound. Only his eyes remain inscrutable, hidden beneath their thick and fleshy lids. It was 12 o'clock when the next day our train steamed to Pashet Station. We had to fly from there to drove down to Saltashe Park, the lordly country seats of Mr. Kelly. At the door, Skin of My Tooth asked for the master of the house, but hearing that he was out, he suggested that his card might be taken to Mrs. Kelly. The next moment we were ushered into a luxuriously furnished library, full of books and flowers, and with deep mullioned windows opening out upon a Queen Anne terrace. The mistress of the house, an exceedingly beautiful woman, received us with every mark of eagerness and conjugality. She welcomed us, or rather my esteemed employer, most effusively, and when we were all seated, she asked many questions of Mr. Edward Kelly, to which Skin of My Tooth replied as often as she allowed him to get a word in. "Oh, Mr. Mulligan," she said finally, "I'm so glad that you asked to see me. I've been positively ill and devoured with anxiety over my brother-in-law. My husband thinks that I am upset myself and only get hopelessly wretched if I read about it all in the papers, so he won't allow me to see one for now. But I assure you, uncertainty is killing me, as I feel sure that Mr. Kelly is trying to comfort me and to make Edward's case appear more hopeful than it is." Skin of My Tooth gravely shook his head. "I could not very well be more hopeless," he said. "You can't mean that," she said, while gathering her tears in her eyes. "He is innocent, Mr. Mulligan. I swear he is innocent. You don't know him. He would never do anything so vile." "I quite believe that, my dear lady, but unfortunately circumstances are terribly against him. Even his dead dog Rags speaks in dumb eloquence in his master's condemnation." "Rags!" she exclaimed in astonishment. "What can that poor doggie have to do with this awful tragedy? Poor old thing! It lost its way the very morning the terrible catastrophe occurred. M. de Cohort was staying here that day, and I had taken him for a drive to the hitching before luncheon. On my way home I saw Rags on the road, looking very sorry for himself. I took him in the carriage with me and brought him home." Skin of My Tooth looked politely interested, but I hardly liked to breathe. It seemed to me that the fellow's creator's life was even now hanging in the balance. "Rags knew all of us here just as well as he knew his own master," continued Miss Kelly. "When my husband went out with his gun in the afternoon, Rags followed him, whilst M. de Cohort and I went to the garden party." "And what happened to Rags after that?" asked Skin of My Tooth. "To tell you the truth, the awful tragedy I heard of that afternoon drove poor Rags out of my mind. And the next day, I'm thankful to say, M. de Cohort left us and went back to Paris. I did hear something about the poor dog being drowned in the pond. That was a shocking rover. It really must trouble and pleasure to his master." Miss Kelly was sitting with her back to the great mullioned windows. She could not, therefore, see her husband, who seemed to have just walked across the terrace to have a pause for a moment, with his hand on the open window before entering the room. Whether he had heard that his wife was saying, I do not know. Certain it is that his face looked very white and set. "I remember now," continued Miss Kelly innocently, "seeing my husband put away Rags' collar the other day in his bureau. I dare say Edward will be glad to have it later on, when all this horrid business is over. You must tell him that we've got it back quite safe." I all but uttered an exclamation then. It seemed too terrible to hear this young wife so hopelessly and innocently denouncing her own husband with every word she uttered. I looked up at the motionless figure still standing in the window. Skin of My Tooth, who sat immediately facing it, seemed to make an almost imperceptible sign of warning. Mr. Kelly then retired as silently as come. 2 minutes later he entered the room by the door. He seemed absolutely calm and collected, and held his hand out to Skin of My Tooth, who took it without the slightest hesitation. Then Mr. Kelly turned to his wife and said quietly, "Will you forgive me, won't you, dear, if I take Mr. Mulligan into my study? There are 1 or 2 points I want to discuss with him over a cigar." "Oh, I'll run away," she said gaily. "I must dress for luncheon. You'll stay, won't you, Mr. Mulligan? No, I am sorry. Well, goodbye, and mind you bring better news next time. She was gone, and we three men were left alone. I offered to leave the room, but Mr. Kelly motioned for me to stay. The servants would wonder, he said icily, and it really does not matter. Then he turned his skin on my tooth and said quietly, I suppose that you came here today for the express purpose of setting a trap for my wife, and she fell into it, poor soul, not knowing that she was damning her own husband. Of course, you did your duty by your client. Now, what is your next move? To place Miss Kelly in a witness box on my client's behalf and make her repeat the story she told us today, replied Skin of my Tooth with equal calm. And after that? After that, you must look to yourself, Mr. Kelly. I am not a detective, and you know best whether you have anything to fear once the attention of the police is directed upon yourself. I shall obtain Mr. Edward Kelly's discharge tomorrow, of course, backed by Miss Kelly's testimony, and, if need be, that of Mr. Cohet in Paris. I can now prove that the dog could not have been shot by my client, since it was following you that afternoon the murder was committed. Since the chief pointed in the theory of the prosecution lies in the fact that Mr. Wadcote and the dog were shot the same day, with the same rifle, and seeing the animal's collar was known to be in your possession the day following the crime, my client is absolutely assured to obtain a full discharge, and to be allowed to leave the court without a stain upon his character. Mr. Kelly listened to Skin of my Tooth's quiet explanation without betraying the slightest emotion. And then he said, Thank you, Mr. Milligan. I think I quite understood this situation. Personally, I feel that it is entirely for the best. Life under certain conditions becomes abominable torture, and I have no strength left in which to combat fate. I did kill old Wadcote in a moment of unreasoning fear, just as I killed Rags, because he too made too much noise. But by heaven, I had no intention to kill the old man, and I certainly never would have allowed my brother to suffer seriously under an unjust accusation. I firmly believe that justice could not miscarry, and while I thought that you were sharp enough to save him, I also reckoned that I had been clever enough to shield myself from every side. He paused a moment, and then he continued, just like a man for whom the long time has been burdened with his secret, and suddenly made almost happy by confiding it to a stranger. I had had many losses on the turf, he said, and had made the losses good by defrauding our firm. It was a long and laborious plan, very carefully laid, but I was always clever with my pen, and my brother's signature and Wadcote's writing were easy enough to imitate. Then one day I found an old uniform in the cellar of the office. My father used to keep a commissionaire when he had a business. It was about my size and gave me the idea for a disguise. It all worked right, and I knew that I could make my defalcations good at the bank very soon. It was a positive thunderbolt to use when, on Tuesday morning, I received a letter from old Wadcote telling me that he was coming over to Saltashe that afternoon to see M. de Cohet and myself about a terrible discovery he had made. I knew that he would walk through the woods, and I found him sitting near the pond, smoking alone. I only meant to persuade him to hold his tongue and say nothing to M. de Cohet for the present. But he was obstinate. He guessed that I was guilty. He threatened me with disclosure, like the fool he was, and I had to kill him, in self-defense. Somehow, although he undoubtedly was a great criminal, I could not help sympathizing with this man. This beautiful house we were all in, all the luxury and comfort with which he was outwardly surrounded, seemed such terrible mockery inside the moral tortures he must have endured. I was quite glad when he had finished speaking, and the Skin of my Tooth was able presently to take his leave. Only a few hours later, the evening papers were full of the sensational suicide of Mr. Kelly in his apartment in the Saltashe Park. Almost at the same time as this astonishing news was published by the press, the authorities of Scotland Yard had received a written confession, signed by Mr. Kelly, in which he confessed to having caused the death of Mr. Jeremiah Wadcote in Saltashe Woods by the accidental discharge of a gun. Little frightened at first of any complications that might arise, he had said nothing about the accident at the time, Then, when his own brother became implicated in the tragedy, and how he felt terrible at his own position, would now be if he made a tardy confession. The matter began to prey upon his mind until he became so unhinged but sought in death solace for his mental agony. That man was a genius, said Skin of My Teeth, commenting on the confession. Strange that he should have lost his nerve at the last, for I feel that the crime would never have been brought absolutely home to him. At any rate, I could always have gotten him off. What do you think, Muggins? And I quite agreed with Skin of My Tooth. Okay. I did have to pause the ads, so I will have to let them go this time. By all means, feel free to take a break, and I'll be back in a bit. Okay. I guess we are officially back. Yeah. So what did you think of that story? It's a lot longer. It's only 10 pages, but then I keep forgetting how different books have the pages set up. This one has it set up as copies of the magazine art, the magazine stories, so it's 10 pages, but it's double columned. And there was one illustration through the entire thing. So it lasted considerably longer than a normal 10-page story would. But anyway, hope you all got stretched and relaxed and whatnot. I'll get a quick sip of my water because it seems it'll be an interesting voice to do for another story. So, reading the full title again. Skin of My Tooth, his memoirs by his confidential clerk, compiled and edited by Baroness Orczy. Number 2. The Case of the Polish Prince. I doubt whether full credit was given to Skin of My Tooth for the solution of that mysterious incident in Saltashe Woods, which he, and no one else, brought about. Personally, I firmly believe that Kelly of Saltashe Park would have allowed his brother to hang sooner than confess if Skin of My Tooth had not succeeded in absolutely conquering him. Now, in the case of the Polish prince, no one could deny, but perhaps I'd better say how it all happened. The Swanborough tragedy was filling the London and the provincial papers with its gruesome mysteries. Early on Tuesday morning, March 18th, the body of a man, shockingly mutilated, was found on the level crossing just below Swanborough Station of the London and North Western Railway. It is always difficult to dwell on the grim details which are the usual accompaniment with this type of drama. Sufficient to say, in this instance, the body was found lying straight along the metals, so that the passing express had gone clean over the trunk and the face. What mutilation the train had left unaccomplished had been completed by the sparks from the engine. The face was unrecognizable, the hair had been singed, the flesh and hands and neck had been charred. The particular position of the body, so carefully laid down, with the feet pointing towards Swanborough Station and the head towards Bletchley, disposed of any theory of accident that may have first suggested itself. And it was clearly a case of murder, the unfortunate man having, presumably, been rendered unconscious, and then placed on the metals, or one of deliberate suicide. The grim tragedy immediately assumed the appearance of complete mystery. Though Swansborough is but a tiny, struggling village, as part of Buckinghamshire was scantily populated, no one seemed to have missed a relative or friend, or to recognize the clothes or sundry small articles of jewelry, etc., found on the mutilated body. The police had published a description of the clothes and articles, and of the body, as far as this could be done. The unfortunate man seemed to have been about 35 years of age, 5 feet 9 inches in height, and of slight build. He was evidently in the habit of wearing a green silk shade over one eye, for one was found lying on the ground quite close to the head. The right forearm showed a very recent wound caused by the burning of some acid, probably vitriol. The people of Swanborough, however, in spite of this horrible gruesomeness of the tragedy, seemed to take very little interest in the evocation of its mysteries. Perhaps they, too, the average English yokel's horror of having anything to do with the police. But that as it may, it was not until the following day that a more enlightened and more enterprising villager bethought himself of walking to the police station and informing the inspector there that maybe the murdered man was Stockton's lodger. It appears that Mrs. Stockton, who rented a small cottage not far from the railway, had had a lodger on and off for the past 6 months. No one in the village had ever seen him. If he ever went outside the cottage, he must have done so at night. But young Stockton had sometimes talked to the neighbors about her mother's lodger. He was a foreigner, he said, and no end of swell, with a name no decent body could pronounce, as it was half a yard long. He was certainly very odd in his ways, for he used to go quite suddenly, and not come back for a week or so on end. Mrs. Stockton never knew where he went, and then he would turn up again, mostly in the very early mornings. Life in rural districts is wonderfully self-centered. Still, the police thought it odd that this tardy information did not come from Mrs. Stockton herself, but for some, if some lodger or her lodger was missing the show. The detective inspector immediately went down to the cottage. Finding the door locked and getting no answer to his repeated knocks, he forced his way in, and followed by two constables. Parlor and kitchen were empty, but up on the floor above, in one of the three little bedrooms, the men found an unfortunate woman lying on the bed with her throat cut. There was no sign or trace anywhere of young Stockton. The mystery, of course, had been deepened more and more. Nothing in the cottage seemed to have been touched. There were even a couple of sovereigns and some silver lying in a money box. So far, it seems that two purposeless and shocking murders have been committed probably within a few moments of each other, as Mrs. Stockton had evidently been dead for a good many hours. The detective inspector instituted immediate inquiries in the neighborhood on the subject of young Stockton, who certainly had unaccountably disappeared. It seems that he was a bricklayer by trade, lately in the employ of the Northwestern Railway, but recently dismissed owing to ill conduct. A description of the missing man was telegraphed to every police and railway station in the kingdom, but so far not a trace of him had been found. The theory of the police was that he had been boarded the very train which had mangled the body of his victim, then dropped off again a good deal further down the line. Whether he had murdered the foreign swell for purposes of robbery, and killed his mother in order to get rid of the inconvenient witness, was of course a mere matter of conjecture. Certain it had that he had vanished, almost as if the earth had swallowed him up. Part 2. From the first, Skin of My Tooth was rather interested in the Swanborough tragedy. The enigmatic personality of one of the victims, the veil of complete mystery which the murderer had succeeded in throwing over his crime, the foreign swell who lived in the English cottage, all appealed to my chief's love for what the dramatic and mysterious. It was on the afternoon of the 20th, just after I had come in with the evening papers, that there was a timid rap on the outer office door. I went to open it, and to my amazement saw before me the daintiest vision that had ever graced our fussy old office in Finsbury Square. It was a lovely young girl, scarcely out of her teens, beautifully dressed in deep black, who asked me if she could speak to Mr. Mulligan immediately. It is such an unusual thing for us to receive the visits of charming young ladies that for the moment I quite forgot to ask what her name. However, Skin of My Tooth was quite ready to receive her, whoever she was, and the next moment I had shown the lady into the private office. She walked up to my esteemed employer, held out a dainty gloved hand, and said to him, "My name is quite unknown to you, Mr. Mulligan," she began. "I am Miss Marian Calvert, and I would not have ventured to come to you like this in your office without an introduction, and all alone, but I want the best legal advice possible." "Yes?" "My friend, Miss Martin, who is engaged to Mr. Edward Kelly of Saltashe Park, told me all about you once a long time ago, and how much you had done for Mr. Kelly. I remember then making up my mind that if I were ever in trouble and wanted a lawyer, I would come to you. And now—" She had undone her furs and seated herself beside the desk. Skin of My Tooth gave me a wink. I knew what that meant. I was to sit in my usual corner behind the wooden partition and take shorthand notes of everything the lady said.
Mr. Malkin,
She resumed very abruptly.
I was engaged to Prince Saratoga, who was murdered the other day on the railway near Swanborough.
Then indeed you are in trouble, said Skin of my Tooth very gently, and that is why you have come to console me. Tell me, what can I do for you?
I'm afraid that my story will seem very foolish to you. I was only a schoolgirl then. It was 6 months ago.
She explained with a touching naivete.
I had just left school and was going down to Buckinghamshire to stay with my guardian, Mr. Percival Lake, and his wife, when I first met Prince Orczy. It was a train between Euston and Swanborough, and he was so kind and attentive and so interesting. He told me that he was a Pole, and he talked about his country and the Revolution and the Polish martyrs who had suffered in the cause of freedom. He himself was an exile from the country he loved so well because he had taken part in the Revolution. He had large estates, but they were temporarily confiscated by the Tsar, so he had come to England, which he loved, and lived in a small cottage amidst roses and lilies and dreamt there of Poland and her liberty. You may imagine how delighted I was when he told me that this ideal cottage was in Swanborough, close to where my guardian lived, for I had hopes that I should see him again. Well, Mr. Malkin, I won't bore you with all the details of what the happiest time of my life. Mrs. Lake was kindness herself, and she kept herself rather strict eye over my movements. However, very soon I discovered that I could always slip out in the evenings, while she went to sleep over her game of patience. And then I used to meet with Constantine, Prince Saratoga, in the fields at the bottom of the garden. Very soon we had both realized that we loved another passionately.
But surely your garden, suggested Skelematooth.
My guardian was away during the first fortnight of my stay in Swanborough. When he came, things were very much altered. Someone, one of the servants perhaps, had evidently spied upon me and told him of my meetings with Prince Saratoga, for he read me a long lecture on the subject of foreign adventurers and English girls with money, and forbade me ever to see the Polish prince again. Of course, I had obliged to obey him then, as he kept a very pretty sharp lookout over my movements, and I saw nothing of Constantine for a week. But the moment Mr. Lake went back out of town, we were able to resume our happy evening meetings in the fields. This went on for some time, during which my love for my future husband grew with every obstacle my guardian placed in my way. But Mr. Lake was often obliged to be absent from home on business, and you may be sure that Constantine and I made the most of these happy intervals. We had agreed that we should be married as soon as I was of age and free to do as I pleased. During all that time, Mr. Morgan, I was absolute ignorance of my future financial position, and Constantine, with a delicacy of the positively sublime, which put to shame Mr. Lake's cynical insinuations, had never asked me any questions on the subject. I vaguely knew that my father had left me a considerable fortune under the trusteeship of Mr. Lake, and I concluded that I should have to use that fortune when I came of age. To my astonishment, however, on my 18th birthday, which was the 9th of this month, my guardian informed me that, by the terms of my father's will, I was now to become sole mistress of the £40,000 he had left me. The next day Mr. Lake took me up to his office in London and rendered me an accountant of his guardianship. Then he placed into my hands 3 large packets, each of which contained my £40,000 of securities, chiefly railway and mining shares. He told me that I was now free to do with them what I pleased. I had been ostensibly arranged that I should stay in London for a few days with some school friends of mine, but secretly Constantine and I planned to spend long, happy days together. I took a room in Victoria Street, and when he used to come up to Swanborough in the mornings sometimes, and we would go out to see the sights of London. We meant to get married almost immediately and go to live abroad. I was rich now, and we could afford to live in the style befitting Prince Saratoga's rank. She paused. It seemed as if she could not continue her narrative. So far it had been one of simple, delicate love romance, in which only the mysterious personality of the foreign adventurer appeared to be a dim passage of coming evil. Now, for the first time since the terrible tragedy occurred, the young girl, little more than a child herself, found herself forced to speak to a stranger, and her very nerves must have quivered at the ordeal. The skin of my tooth did not speak. He sat in the shadow, watching the play of every emotion on the delicately chiseled face before him. Last Monday, Mr. Mullins, she resumed at last with the effort of self-control, Constantine went down to Swanborough in the afternoon, after having spent the day in town with me. He meant to settle the small accounts he had in the village and stay in London until our marriage. I was sitting quietly at the tea shop yesterday when I heard someone close to me read aloud in the newspaper the account of the mysterious tragedy in Swanborough. A man had been found killed on the level crossing, his body and head shockingly mutilated. A description of his clothes followed. 1 or 2 articles found near the body. Oh, it was terrible, Mr. Malkin. From those descriptions I knew that the murdered man must be my fiancé, Prince Saratoga.
There was a long silence from the fusty old office. The skin of my tooth was giving the young girl time to recover herself, when he said quietly, "It must indeed have been hard to bear your peculiarly isolated position, but you have not yet told me how I can be of service to you."
Oh, it's about the money, Mr. O'Gallagher, the whole fortune. Prince Saratoga had charge of it all, of course, and now I am penniless.
You need to have fear. We can easily trace the securities for you. The thief won't be able to negotiate them.
Oh, the securities,
she said naively.
They were all sold.
Indeed. The skin of my tooth's very dry comment.
Yes, at Constantine's suggestion, I instructed the brokers of Messrs. Furnival & Co. to sell my shares for me. This made a check for £38,000, which I endorsed, and Prince Saratoga cashed the check. He had all the money in notes, and he told me to write my name on the back of each. On the Monday we went round together to several foreign banks, where we changed our English notes for foreign currency. You see, we intended to live in Russia. I had meant to start for Paris almost immediately.
I wish that I could have caught sight of a glimpse of Skin of my Tooth's face. As it is, I thought I heard the peculiar low whistle which he usually gives when the point of a case particularly strikes his fancy. "I see," he said at last. "And that money, did the prince carry it about with him?"
He gave me £50, as I meant to go shopping after he left me. The remainder he kept in his pocketbook.
Life's strange ironies. But fortunately for her, many allusions, and the young girl did not catch the drift of this last remark, for she said with great vehemency,
"You see now, Mr. Malkin, that there could be no question of accident or suicide. Prince Yorko was murdered and robbed, and I've come to you that you may help me track his murderer."
"I will do my best," said the skin of my teeth with a smile. "At the same time, we must hope to track your lost fortune for you. But I think that it is all the trouble I need you this morning. Where are you staying?"
"I'm still at 182 Victoria Street."
"Then I can easily communicate with you. I will see the detective inspector in charge of the case, and, of course, let him know all about the money, which should be found in the murderer's possession. Was the money French or Russian?" She shook her head.
"I really couldn't tell you. You see, Constantine sent everything."
Skin of my tooth sighed. So much naivete and blind confidence would be ridiculous, were it not sublime. 5 minutes later, I had shown the lady downstairs, and when I returned, I found Skin of my Tooth lounging in his big armchair. "It was a case of bitter bits with a vengeance, wasn't it, sir?" I said with a laugh, whilst I carefully collected my notes. This so-called prince seemed to have been so complete a scoundrel as the man who murdered him. "Muggins, you're an ass!" was the only comment my esteemed employer made during the whole of the rest of the afternoon. Part 3. In the meanwhile, the evening papers had brought no further news of the Swanborough mystery. No trace of the missing plate layer had been found, and it was pretty clear that at the inquest, which was fixed for tomorrow, Friday, the police would have no important evidence to add to the scanty scraps already collected and published. "The authorities of Scotland Yard will resent my interference in this case," said Skidamatooth to me, "but I must chance that. If I leave them to blunder on, they might have done over the murder. I shall never get Miss Calvert's money for the scoundrel will succeed in slipping through our fingers." He sent me down to Scotland Yard the next morning to make a necessary declaration with regard to Prince Saratoga's antecedents and related us to Miss Calvert, and also to the missing quantity of foreign money. The detective inspector who was looking after the case was greatly excited to hear my news. "This gives us a motive for the crime," he said, "and the foreign money in the possession of an uneducated Buckinghamshire yokel in Stockton is sure to lead us to discovery of its speedy arrest. At any rate, now that we have so much fresh data, I will send one of our men, Mason, who is very capable, down to Swanborough again. I will give him instructions to place himself at Mr. Mulligan's disposal should he require any local information." When I went back to the office, I found the hansom at the door, and Skidamatooth waiting for me with his hat on. "Come down to Swanborough with me, Muggins," he said. "I have worked out this case in my own mind, and I want to ascertain, by studying the geography of the place, whether I am right or wrong." We went to Swansborough, catching the 12:05 from Euston. It was a couple of hours' run on the northwestern line, but during the whole of the journey, Skidamatooth never spoke a word. He sat leaning back in his corner with that funny little smile of his playing around the corners of his fat mouth, and his thick lids drooping as if in semi-sullenness. But every now and then I caught a flash, a steely, almost cruel look in his lazy blue eyes, and his nostrils would quiver like those of a hound who has found a fresh scent. I knew those symptoms well. I had seen them in whenever the sharp and astute lawyer was on the time of being merged in the tracker of crime. Skidamatooth had all the instincts of a bloodhound. Placed face to face with a murder, he would follow the trail of the assassin with almost superhuman cunning. He did not deduce, he seldom reasoned. He felt the criminal. I believe firmly that he scented him. When we steamed into the small country station a little after 2 p.m., we found that Mason, the detective who was personally known to Skidamatooth, had come down by the previous train. He was standing talking to the booking clerk when my chief went up to speak to him. I think that he was none too pleased to see a lawyer mixed up in the case, while he no doubt considered strictly the business of the police. But Skidamatooth seemed to have armed himself for the afternoon with a limitless fund of Irish urbanity. "I won't detain you long, Mason," he said with a bland smile. "I should pleasantly like to have a look at the body with you, and in the meanwhile, I dare say, while we walk through the village, will you put me en fait with the latest news in connection with this interesting case?" Little news," said Mason with marked impatience. "The case is a very troublesome one, and if it's meddled with, I don't believe we shall ever get the rights of it." "I see that you're having a chat with the young booking clerk here," said Skidamatooth, quietly ignoring the detective's rudeness. "I wonder what his impression was of the Polish prince. So few people seem to have seen him, but of course at the railway station they might have known him by sight." "The porters and the booking clerk only saw him once, and that was on Monday when he came down by the afternoon train, and one man saw him after 11 in the same evening. It was just after the last slow train had gone through, and they were closing the booking office. It was then walking in the line to young Stockton, towards this level crossing." "What sort of man was he? What sort of looking man was he?" "A regular foreigner, it appears, with thick black hair falling over from his forehead, and a heavy black mustache. He had a huge scar across the left side of his face, from a wound, I suppose. They say it looked like a saber cut, and it seems to have injured his eye as well, for he wore a guard over the left one. Anyway, he was quite unrecognizable now, he added grimly. Mason had led the way along the platform while he was talking, and we had followed him. He was now walking along the railway line, about 2 paces in front of us. On our left, a tall and neat hedge fenced off a field, and some 200 yards ahead was a level crossing, where the road cut the line at right angles. About 20 yards from the level crossing was a wide gap in the hedge. Mason pointed out to us. I supposedly stopped and enticed him to the field under some pretense or the other, and rendered him unconscious there, then dragged him to the metals. This gap, Mr. Lake tells me, used to be quite a small one. It has obviously been broken and widened recently. Mr. Lake, inquired Skin of my Tooth. Mr. Percival Lake. This field is his property. The house and grounds are his opposite end of it. Yes. I'm glad to hear that. I should like to call on Mr. Lake before I leave Swanborough today. We had come to a standstill on the very spot where the awful and gruesome murder of the mysterious foreign prince had been perpetrated. Skin of my Tooth was looking at the surroundings and the ground before him, and every now and then I could hear him snorting, and caught sight of the weird and quick flash in his eyes, which gave his jovial, fat face a cruel look. Then, without a word of warning, he suddenly darted through the gap in the hedge and into the field beyond. With an impatient shrug of the shoulders, Mason followed him, and I brought up the rear. It was mid-December, and the ground was hard as nails. A few patches of dead grass only showed here and there. We were in a field about 30 acres, triangular in shape, with the same hedge surrounding it, and the road and grounds forming an apex. The road ran on either side of it, converging towards another on the other side of the house. The afternoon had rapidly drawn in, and past 3 o'clock and the thick mist had descended. Mason followed with evident and unconcealed ill humor, Skin of my Tooth and Progredius through the field. At first he had offered certain hints and volunteered some information, but at last he seemed to have resigned himself to the part of a bad-tempered man in charge of a lunatic. We walked straight across the field to where the house and its thick shrubbery formed an extreme boundary. There, too, a small gate led to a cottage and a tiny garden which occupied a piece of ground that seemed to have been sliced out of Mr. Lake's property. "Is this Miss Stockton's cottage?" "It is Mrs. Stockton's cottage," explained Mason, in answer to Skin of my Tooth's inquiry. Quite close to the gate there was a tool shed, which seemed to interest Skin of my Tooth immediately, for he lighted a match after match in order to examine it inside and out. However, he expressed no desire to view the interior of the cottage, and at last, when he was quite numb with fatigue and cold, he turned to Mason and said quietly, "I'm quite ready to go to the station now and have a look at the body." For a moment I thought that Mason meant to go on strike, but evidently he began to feel his orders, and perhaps he too had... But evidently he had his orders, or perhaps he too began to feel, as I had done so often, a curious magnetic influence of Skin of my Tooth's personality, which commands obedience in strange moments and in strange places. Be that as it may, he refrained from making any remark, but passing through the gate of the cottage garden, he went out to the road. About 5 minutes' brisk and silent walk brought us to the village, and then on to the little police station. Still, without a word, Mason led the way into an inner room. There upon the table deal, covered with the sheets, lay the body of the murdered man. Part 4. It is not often, thank heaven for that, I have to go through such an unpleasant moment in my faithful adherence to my duty to my employer. I'll never forget that terrible feeling of sickly horror which overcame me when Skin of my Tooth so quietly lifted the sheet covered the dead man. The whole scene is even now vividly impressed upon my mind. A small, low-raftered room, an oil lamp hanging from the ceiling and throwing its feeble light upon the gruesome thing on which I dared not look, and upon the strange, bulky figure, so strangely impressive at the moment, of my chief. Mason stood close by in the shadow. I could see that even he did not care to cast too long a look at the hopelessly mutilated face of the murdered man. Skin of my tooth, however, was quite unmoved. He had dropped the sheet and calmly, one by one, took up each garment from the pile of clothes which lay neatly folded beside the body. "These were found upon the deceased, I understand," he said. The detective nodded. "All," he replied, "except the gloves, which were in the grip of his hand, and which this man could never have worn," commented Skin of my Tooth dryly. "Though they are quite odd, they are 2 sizes too small for his hand." There was a silence again for a few moments. Then Skin of my Tooth, having carefully examined each individual garment, put the last one down. Then, placing his hand upon the pile, he said, "I hope for your sake, Mason, and for mine too, for that matter, since it would save arguments, that you have arrived at the only possible and complete solution of this so-called mystery." "The only mystery in this matter," retorted Mason gruffly, "is the real person of the deceased. We know who murdered him all right enough, though we don't know where the murderer may be at the present moment. The person of the deceased is no mystery to me. He was a young man named Stockton, a plate-layer by trade, and inhabitant of the village," said Skin of my Teeth, making an extraordinary announcement as if he were stating the most obvious and commonplace fact. Mason shrugged his shoulders and looked almost appallingly at me, as if he wanted to take charge of this unraveling lunatic. "The only thing that puzzles me," continued Skin of my Tooth imperturbably, "is that it never struck any of you gentlemen in charge of this case how badly some of these clothes must have fitted this man." "People don't always have their clothes cut by London tailor," muttered Mason sarcastically. "Well, undoubtedly, but in this case the fit is so erratic. While the trousers would be at least 3/4 of an inch too long for the leg, the coat sleeves would be at least an inch too short. This man could not have had these gloves on at all, and every time he wore these boots, which are not new, he must have endured positive tortures, yet he has no corns on his feet." "The clothing might have been a scratch lot, bought at a second-hand clothes shop," suggested Mason. "A man does not buy second-hand boots that are too much small for him." "Well, what's your idea, then?" "That they are another man's clothes," said Skin of my Tooth quietly. "But one more thing. The suit of clothes are good, such as a gentleman might wear. Boots, gloves, hats are all expensive kind, but the underclothes are the commonest and coarsest make." "That often happens," mutters Mason obstinately. "It certainly in itself would mean very little were it not for the fact that the almost superhuman cunning everything has been devised in order to completely destroy the identity of this victim. From the clothes, every tag and some button have been removed that might bear the tailor's name. On the forearm, vitriol was used, in order, obviously, to obliterate some mark, a tattoo, perhaps, which might have made the body recognizable. Or the same corrosive substance destroyed the fingernails, which might have told a tale. The accepted theory is that the deceased was engaged in some work which necessitated such use of sulfuric acid. That might account for the corroded fingernails if the man were particularly careless, but not for the wound on his forearm. Think about it carefully, Mason, and then bear in mind that the fact that the only person who might by chance have identified the body, in spite of its mutilation, was also murdered." "You mean Miss Stockton?" "The mother, undoubtedly," replied Skin of my Tooth quietly. "Surely you see for yourself that the body we have here before us is that of Stockton, the plate-layer, whereas the so-called Prince Siratoka, this arch-scoundrel, thief, liar, assassin, who so far has escaped the vigilance of the police—" "You may be right," murmured Mason, convinced, as I could see, in spite of himself, with the firm logic of Skin of my Tooth arguments. "But as far as I can see, you have not by any means solved our difficulty. It's quite one thing to hunt in Buckinghamshire yokel, who would be trying to pass a quantity of foreign money and cannot speak any language but his own. quite another to search through the continent of Europe, now for a foreigner whose real appearance, I presume, even your client, his sweetheart, is ignorant. You don't have to search the continent of Europe, my man, extended my tooth with a jovial laugh. You just apply as quickly as you can, for a gentleman who may slip through your fingers. It's for a search warrant and warrant for the arrest of Mr. Percival Lake of Swinsborough. You'll find most of the £38,000 there in foreign money, Russian or French. That money belongs to my client, Miss Marion Calvert, who will file affidavits to this effect tomorrow. You are mad, retorted Mason. Mad, am I? Laughed Skin of my Tooth. Why, man, you know as well as I do right now that I'm right. Why, I guessed the trick the moment Miss Calvert told me her little pathetic story. Then I came down here and saw how admirably the geography of the place was adapted to the archvillain's infamous plotting for robbing his young ward. Why, you have to remember the 3 points to realize how absolutely right I am. Point number 1. Whenever Mr. Percival Lake was at home, Miss Calvert would never see her sweetheart. The moment he was supposed to go back to town, she found him in the trysting place of the field, but always at night, remember, when the disguise, the scar, the black hair, could more easily deceive the young girl. It was only when he had got money absolutely in his possession that he became more audacious and saw her in London in broad daylight. I've always thought that the scar was thick and the hair was meant as a disguise, muttered Mason. Some people are so clever at making up. Mr. Lake is a little bald and clean-shaved. And the costume change was so easy in execution that was a convenient little tool shed in his own shrubbery, secluded from all eyes until recently, fitted with a good lock and key, which have since, very obviously, been removed. Why, nothing in the world could be more easy than for an arch-scoundrel like that man Lake to ostensibly leave for town in the evening, carrying a bag and walking through his field, to spend the night in a tool shed and emerge therefore in the very early morning as Prince Yertuga, then to repeat his performance whenever the foreign adventurer had to resume the original part of Mr. Percival Lake, Miss Calvert's stern guardian. And at this point, too, that the man who played the trick on Miss Calvert must have known all about her financial situation and the full terms of her father's will, by which she came of age at 18. That certainly brings it nearer home Lake than ever. And your third point, Mr. Mulligan. That this so-called foreigner was supposed to have gone up from London to Swanbury very frequently during the week, when he met Mr. Calvert in town nearly every day. He helped her to transfer her English securities into foreign money, and yet no one had seen Swansborough Railway had ever seen him before the night of the murder. Then he wished to show himself, openly, in the company of that plate-layer, so that, when he had muttered Stockton and dressed up his body in his own cast-off disguise, everyone should fancy that he recognized the mangled remains of the personality of the Polish prince. He did the murder at dead of night, of course, and in the privacy of his own fields. He used vitriol where the marks of identification might reveal the plate-layer, then murdered Miss Stockton and slipped away quietly to bed. I dare say his wife was an accomplice. Some women are very loyal and very obedient to their husbands. But come on, Muggins, he said, suddenly turning his voice towards me. We shall miss that 6:30 up from London. We must nearly now. Mason will want to think this all over. No, I don't, sir, said Mason firmly. I'm going to town with you, if you will allow me. What for? To report myself and to get a warrant for the arrest of Mr. Percival Lake. Everyone remembers the arrest of Mr. Percival Lake on the double charge of murder. In his safe at his house in Swansborough were found the French and Russian notes, accounting in value to about £38,000. Tracked to earth, the scoundrel made but a poor defense. Fortunately for his relations, since he had well connected, he died of sudden heart failure during the subsequent magisterial inquiry, and was never committed for trial. All this happened 3 years ago. Miss Calvert is married now, and has evidently forgotten her former passionate love for the mysterious Polish patriot. Whew. Long stories for a 10-page. So, what do you think of the Baroness so far? Her other stories were about a female. I can't remember if she was an insurance agent or a detective. Anyway, they were good. I do have them on my story channel. And Rivals of Sherlock Holmes, of course. But let's see. It is late-ish. I know I wouldn't be able to get another story read tonight. Does anyone have a raid suggestion by any chance? I'm not seeing any more of the writers and readers at the moment. Oh, there's an underarena. I didn't notice. Oh, wait. Herb Griffin's on. Oh. She is also doing mysteries in the form of Edgar Allan Poe. So, pick a message, any message. We will be doing fairy tales tomorrow. Much like Matsu did earlier, reading from the Crimson Fairy Book. So, I hope to see you all tomorrow. I would say please stick around for the raid, but that's entirely up to you. Since I've turned off my thing saying how many people are actually watching. But, have a good evening, and I'll hopefully see you tomorrow. Night all.